Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. Thanks again to those who have joined the Patreon since last episode. Today's episode is a follow-up to the Litigation and Legacy episode with Steve Dunn from 2 weeks ago. I sit down again with Whitney, and we're joined by Meghan Cichy for our reflections and a fun friend chat. First, thanks to those who provided their thoughts on the episode. These came mostly via text this time, folks using words like fascinating and letting me know they were dying inside while listening. What stuck out the most for those who were fearful and cautious about saying anything at all, should they be the next targets of litigation. And I get it. We got an encrypted email warning us to be careful with a link to Steve's blog. It was his response to a statement from the leadership of iaedp's African American Eating Disorders Professionals / BIPOC Committee about the concerns members had about their upcoming spring 2024 symposium in Orlando and the travel advisory issued by the NAACP for the state of Florida. Steve critiques the committee for buying into the, quote, current political clown show, end quote. He lists 12 statistics to show the committee that, quote, the state of Florida ranks among the best states for African Americans with regard to crime, education, and business opportunities, end quote, in his opinion. What makes this part relevant to the conversation we had with Steve is that he was supporting the work of the same committee in shaping the future of iaedp. This type of shape-shifting can be very unnerving and disturbing to some people, and rightfully so. Again, I understand the caution. Even Meghan, Whitney, and I reviewed this episode and debated which parts to take out due to concerns about repercussions. I truly don't know if this combo of drama, caution, and fear exists in any other fields, but I do hope that it can end here and across the board. It does nothing to help patients or support clinicians and only leads to more distrust of the field. A regular listener let me know that they just couldn't keep listening after Steve completely dismissed and devalued the lived experience of our clients and us as clinicians. Let's take a sec to think about who typically dismisses lived experience. It tends to be those whose lived experience is actually the center of the research. All of this has me thinking that the research we have on eating disorders and in much of the nutrition field is lived experience, but only of those who are valued, respected, and deemed worthy of care and attention. So in this case, and for many others, Steve actually believes in lived experience, but only the lived experience of those who are protected and centered by the eating disorder establishment. One last note on the episode I received was how Steve was presenting himself as a person of authority, someone with enough distinction to publicly challenge a medical doctor and go after her with metaphorical nuclear weapons, but then quickly switched up the scenario when asked to identify what should be in a certification should it continue. He said that Whitney and I are those with the expertise and more knowledge in the field. And again, this bait and switch will inevitably inspire caution. I get that. And I trust that Steve will pick up the phone and call if he has any concerns with our work and that we can resolve things just as he and Dr. Gaudiani have been able to do. Who knows? We might even trade Christmas cards this year. With that, let's get to the reflections. Whitney and Meghan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Meghan, tell us a bit about yourself.
My name's Meghan Cichy. I use she, her pronouns, and I work as a dietitian in private practice. I have a small private practice, and I have also been working as a policy analyst at a state Department of Health. That was really stemming from my experience of working as a dietitian and sort of seeing little to no policy advocacy activism really happening in that feels like it's contributing to sort of a change in the patients that I'm working with. I'm always, full, always have a wait list. And that wasn't really what I was going for in terms of the work that I wanted to do. I wanted to put myself out of work as an eating disorder dietitian. And so I knew I needed to do more to sort of get outside of just the one-on-one dietetics work, which is lovely, but it's just not enough. So policy work. And I met Jessica and Whitney in sort of early attempts at advocacy and activism. And now I'm here.
I can't believe you're like doing the damn thing now, Meghan. Like, I love it so, like, you're like doing it. I just love it. I can't believe it.
And
it's pretty amazing and a lot of work.
it is great. And I feel like you were the one who said, this is what needs to be done. I'm going to do it, versus everybody was like, yeah, cool. That needs to be done.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I had enough like resentment building up and like bumping against the same wall over and over that I was like, why? Like, why are we still?
It's great. All right, let's start by me asking for your initial thoughts on the conversation with Steve Dunn.
Okay. Well, so I listened to it twice. And so I like took notes like a student taking notes about everything that happened. And then I listened again and kind of like took more sort of like, I guess, focused notes. But I think some of the things that stood out for me was just, it felt like Steve's understanding of social justice and its Venn diagram with eating disorders was like really disconnected and like really incomplete, but really contributing to his decision making about like who is right or wrong. Like it felt very much like a lot of binaries that he was talking about. And I think that was sort of the biggest thing that stood out to me as like this umbrella component that's like impacting so much of everything else, even like as it relates to his concern about ASDA and their response to Lindo Bacon, but then a really similar reaction about like nuclear bombs towards Jen. I like the inconsistencies were really interesting. So those are kind of some of my main like talking points that I wanted to like see what your all's thoughts were too.
Cool. Whitney, what about you?
Yeah, I think I'm still confused about the lawsuit, to be totally honest. I feel like, and like, again, show me the money. That's been one of my questions from day one, right? Like, show me the money. I'm glad that's being brought up in the lawsuit. Clearly, we were right. There's no accountability. I think I'm still confused. Similar to what you said too, Meghan, the Venn diagram is not Venning. Like there's no connection.
Two circles.
Two circles. And so that part really, really stood out. I think too, though, like I am still shooketh that when he said that he can go into residential treatment centers, like is wild to me. That part really stands out. Yeah, there was just so much. There was honestly so much. I think I've listened to it like 3 or 4 times and like each time just gathered something. I'm so glad we had the conversation though. Like, I'm so glad, Jessica, that we did it. Cause I think you have to be willing to have these conversations. And I always appreciate getting to dialogue with people that I disagree with, like politically, social justice, eating disorder, like, so we have different philosophies. And so I appreciate him taking the time out and kind of chatting with us. But yeah, it's interesting.
I feel like he wanted us to think and want everybody to think that he's doing this on behalf of the eating disorder field and the clinicians. And he's really, got the best intentions and everyone in mind, and is a, pro-diversity candidate. And there were so many points during which I said, wow, I don't know if people have convinced you of such things or you are just, trying to become that person. But with the Black woman who checked all of the boxes was one, the misgendering of Lindo was another, the not walking anything back on the social justice circus. Yeah, so many points at which it was like, is this just your hobby? Was my question. Like, you sound like you're having a great time. Yes. Is this just how you become friends with people like Jen? Is going after them with nuclear bombs and then just letting the dust settle and hoping for the best? I don't know.
I feel like there's other ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same.
When white men do DEI, that's what it should have been.
The title.
I mean, it can be next time. That kind of goes along with the men should not try to be great men or something like that. The Star Trek quote.
Yeah.
And I was like, that you're leaning into that very hard right now. That's a hard lean.
Yeah.
I appreciate the different elements, right? Because as Whitney's talking and as Jessica's talking, I'm like, yeah, and yes, and yeah. Like, I don't think we can summarize it into like one thing, because it's like so many points along that journey of that podcast was like, oh, ooh, what's going on here? Why is this happening?
Is going on? Well, so was anybody able to put that constellation together? Because of course, that's what I'm always looking for. Whitney, I think you were leaning in this direction when you were asking like, why now? And I think that is like a really great thing for all of us to think about, like why. And of course, it was a follow the money argument situation. But I feel like in 2020, if we had, tried to, file a lawsuit against iaedp based on money and taxes, people would have laughed at us, and been like, why are you, trying to rock the boat? This is the only certification we have. Why are you trying to take this away from us? So even as much as the idea is about the money, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wait, this is what I was like kind of pondering on this, because this is how I would say me, you and Meghan like really like formed our friendship and got close. Like Meghan was like, oh, shit's got to change, especially after Meghan like laid out all the numbers. And I think naively, I just assumed everybody else that had their credential when they saw that and they heard the multiple layers of feedback would have been like, oh, absolutely not. Fast forward 4 years, now we've got this disruption. You know what I'm saying? Because the lawsuit doesn't make sense if you're still trying to keep the certification the same.
Yeah.
Why are we suing iaedp? Like you asked the question, like, why are we suing iaedp if you want to keep the certification?
Yes. Well, and I think that's maybe where, and I'm going to go back to you, where what we think iaedp is just not the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes. I think the three of us are very aware of the impact that the certification process has on the field and where that stands in the over certification of our field. And Steve maybe thinks that the organization is valuable both for the certification and for its existence, which I just don't understand.
I also want people to tell me who are listening, like DM me, email me something. Did nobody else want to know where the money was going? Did nobody else want to like have questions about like, why do I have to join a chapter? I'm paying the chapter of the money. Where is that money going? Then I have to go to this conference like every few years. Like, did nobody else like why are we all asking why? I think that's what I'm stumped on. Why were more people not asking why and critically thinking? I think that's what I'm confused.
I think it feeds into the reason we think we need the certification to begin with, because like if we're paying money for something, it's worth something, it's valuable, it means something. And once we have that thing, then we are like by proxy worthy, valuable experts somehow by checking all of these boxes of reading these books and taking this test and doing a case study or whatever. And I don't think it's any of those things, but we want so badly to be seen as all of those things that I could just talk for myself, that I didn't second guess it. And I had the financial support of the treatment center I was working at. So I didn't have to more critically assess my funds. And that was certainly a part of my resentment that built over time with paying all those dues for membership and certification and for the conference and everything, that as I was in private practice, I had to be more judicious. And like, there was just nothing that I was getting from iaedp. I was just paying for these letters that had no impact on my capacity as a provider. It didn't impact who I was seeing. It didn't bring me patients, and it didn't make me a better provider. It was just like this extra expensive checkbox that I had to do. And then like with so many issues that iaedp was getting themselves into without any interest in getting themselves and like addressing it. I was like, there's a lot more organizations out there that are in better alignment that I'd much rather send my money to. And I moved on into that place of like, I don't need these letters, though that was really hard to like communicate that I, am someone who can be helpful to people who are looking for this kind of support. But I mean, the money is extensive, and unless there's like, pressure on the wallet.
People must not have been broke before, because there is no way. There is no way. I'm just saying, I done been broke. I'm not going back. You know what I'm saying? Like, no way. I'm just writing all these checks.
Yeah.
And y'all can't tell me what it's going. I think that's, again, still, and I think it goes to a deeper issue too of like, did you not feel that you were worthy enough?
Yeah, for sure. That part.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Well, and that's something I hear all the time, and that I've talked to multiple people about the idea that, people want to offer something, like to be able to say, that they are competent because of X, Y, and Z thing, which is something that I heard for intuitive eating all the time, like people wanting to offer that they're an intuitive eating dietitian, thinking that it means something, but also just being able to offer people principles is something that I heard over and over again. And I was like, your clinical experience, your relationship with your client is enough. So yes, I think from the people not thinking they're enough, or people who are just starting out and not recognizing that a lot of us don't know what we're doing until we know what we're doing, is also a thing.
And that's sad. I feel like that's sad. Like, iaedp will literally praise on people like that, because it makes me sad that there's a majority of people out there that truly in their soul did not feel worthy enough or good enough to provide excellent service and care, and passionate care to their clients without these additional letters.
And then we go ahead and go like the opposite direction, and people have these letters, and the care that they're giving is
there's that, right?
Like, what is that? Like,
yes,
it's harmful. It's I don't know. So like, I keep saying, right? Like, we think the certification is doing something and it's not. Like, it's not doing what we think it's doing.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
And we're paying a lot of money for it.
I wish somebody would tell me why they want to save it too. Like, I need you to interview, Jessica, somebody else that wants to save this credential, and, can explain what it actually gave them. Like, why?
Credibility, and I feel like that's it. What? And by not credibility, social capital. That's what it is. Not credibility, because it doesn't.
There's value in those perspectives, but is it serving? Is it moving us in the direction that we've been resisting going?
Yeah.
And
Before we move on from money, Whitney, I want to ask you how much the BIPOC conference would need in order to have an in-person conference, because $28,000 sounds pretty, but how much do you need?
Okay. In my fairy tale land, I'm going to say 200 to 250.
Great. So
I think I could make do with 175, 150, 175.
Take the budget.
But I'm going to say 2 to 250.
Let's say.
Yeah. Because again, I believe in paying people, and I want to pay people to travel. I want to pay people for their speaking,
So everybody out there, if Steve actually cares about the BIPOC conference and making the eating disorder field more equitable, that is the amount of money that needs to go to the BIPOC conference.
Yes. I think we can do that.
I'm sure we can do that.
I think we can do that.
And we're paying what was the thousands and thousands of dollars to maintain the certification. What if we put that towards sustaining the BIPOC conference?
Yeah.
That's good. All right. What other things did you two take away from the conversation?
You know what I think it is? I think a lot, and I had shared this, that some of the stuff that I put out there, I regret because people aren't necessarily interested in equity and equality.
Tell me more.
It's there's buzzwords, right? So when Steve was talking about how making it free or reduced for people who are even if you gave it to me for free, I still wouldn't do it. Okay.
Right.
And I think that people are missing the point now. And I think we see that in a lot of things it's not diverse enough or X, Y, and Z. So let's just make it free for a bunch of BIPOC people instead of addressing the root issue. And that really stood out to me too. There are severe issues with the way iaedp is run, the things that it has done, and the credential. And instead of just addressing that, which we've been asking people to do, it's we'll just waive the $7,000 that it cost, or whatever. I don't know the exact number, instead of actually addressing the issue. And then I also can't help but to think Jessica, when you and I and Meghan started asking people to not renew their credential, people thought we were like crazy, right?
And like emotionally upset with us. It wasn't just them thinking, that we were silly or bananas. They got emotional about it.
Yes. Like anything and everything from the angry Black woman to we are disturbed to you name it in between, we got it. Now, I did not expect 4 years later for chapters to be dissolving.
Yeah, right.
I did not see that happening. But it does make me sad that now you've got this man who, give or take what you want of his personality and how people like him feel about him in the world, is pursuing this lawsuit when you could have just listened to us in the beginning.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, don't be upset. It goes back to kind of what we were saying too, of like, there are people that really want to change things from within. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm one of those people. I naturally will gravitate towards how can I make this better within. Some things you can't save. This certification is one of the things that you can't save. And I think if people had really listened to us instead of like having to find it out for themselves or change from within, we wouldn't be here in 2024 with Steve Dunn leading this litigation, lawsuit, whatever have you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see anybody doing it, right? Because like the majority of the people who are certified are holding on to that proof for dear life. I just don't see them taking that risk of divesting, even though there's no risk.
You should elaborate on that, Meghan, because you divested and you had the credential.
Yeah. There's been zero impact, right? I think, and one of the things that Steve had mentioned is like that insurance is requiring someone to be certified within a treatment center or something like that. And so that was one of the arguments that people would say of like, what if insurance won't reimburse our services if we're not certified? Well, if that was true, I mean, I just can't even comprehend how, insurance is fucked already, like the whole system, but like to require such a shitty certification from such a problematic organization in order to provide care. And then with all the financial barriers on top of that, like that is important, but it's like not the most important piece. Like it's just like the certification itself is just shit. Then like how many people would have even less access to care? Like that's not moving us towards equitable access to highly competent care. That is putting speed bumps and walls and barriers and gatekeeping in front of all of that stuff. Like the concept of insurance requiring this certification to reimburse care, it would be destructive to the already like really unstable system that we have going. And like you said, Whitney, the saving of this certification, all of the time and energy and resources spent doing that, it doesn't seem worth it when we could be working on these other issues of like cleaning up house so that we can reduce some of the problems that like Steve was able to identify with like research and clinicians, but like we don't address that by just continuing to do the same thing and like band-aiding the broken certification with a free ticket or whatever.
We can't even keep ED centers open right now. Like, I mean, that's another thing. Like it's hard for me to imagine that centers are going to require this when we can't even keep centers operational. Like that is a huge issue right now in our community, is all of these eating disorder centers shutting down. It's just, I thought that was interesting too.
Whitney and I got a follow-up email from Steve because I had reached out to ask about those Alabama treatment centers. Like I would love to hear from them and how that's going. And he let us know that the BIPOC committee at iaedp and the community as a whole has an opportunity to be on the ground floor and helping come up with new certification guidelines. It was just like, there are two different conversations happening. So I went and looked at the BIPOC committee membership for iaedp, and I don't know when they added BIPOC. My guess it was 2020, but it looks like it used to be the African American Eating Disorder Professional Committee, and they just add a hyphen. So it's like Black people, BIPOC people committee. And already to me shows what iaedp, cares about. Like everybody could have had their own committee. We didn't have to just take the African American one and like make it for everyone. Interesting choice. Mm-hmm. And then Whitney, I sent you the list and you said a lot of people aren't even on, this committee or the in leadership on this committee anymore. And because of that, I was thinking like how hard iaedp is just like signaling that they have this, support and representation when it seems even less and less of the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they've had it under control and they've been addressing it for a long time. Because like even when we were saying, hey, this is a problem, they're like, yes, we've heard this and we're working on it. But like, what has even changed since we've started pushing this? Like, I don't know, like I heard that the required texts are no longer required, that they're now recommended, but I don't know that they've changed. Yeah, so too little, too late.
Yeah.
Do you all think that we need or should have an eating disorder certification? If it was to like the best of your standards, etc.
That's such a hard question. Okay, so I'll be transparent. So I really want to, as a part of my new career, like clearly I believe in education, right? Clearly. Okay, I'm paying student loans for the rest of my life. So I'm going to go into perinatal health, psychiatric health, right? Well, in order to do that, you really need, there's a certain certification. So I get it, right? For people that have no knowledge of eating disorders, you don't know where to go. You hear about this, okay, like this is like my entry into, okay? So I get the appeal, right? Like I want to start treating perinatal mental health psych. I need to pursue further education. It's not $7,000. And a conference is not required every few years. And a membership isn't required. And being part of a chapter isn't required, right? So there is an aspect of education that is a certification that's attached to it, right? So I get the appeal for that. I get there are parts of me that really get the appeal as somebody that's not my expertise, right? So I don't think we need the certification. I do think we need ways to point people into trauma-informed, culturally respective eating disorder care. Like if somebody wants to break into the world of eating disorders, where do they find the resources and the education? Right? Like, yeah, obviously our conference, we want people to sign up. If
yes,
you didn't know, you know what I'm saying? So I do think that is valid. Because you got people out here in private practice doing bariatric assessments and treating eating disorders at the same practice, you know? So I understand that aspect. I don't think we need the certification though, but we do need access to education.
Meghan, what about you? And then I'm going to respond to Whitney.
Yeah. Well, Whitney, I laughed a little earlier as you were talking because I got an email popped across my screen that is my Mohila student loans person telling me I have a
mine
payment
too,
due.
Mine too, Meghan. They're mine too.
And as you were talking, it also it sounds to me like you are describing certification of education, certification of a training, not certification as an expert, which is what iaedp has always said their certification is. Like SEEDS providers are experts. And they're an expert because they have these letters behind their name. Except that it doesn't. It just says they're certified for having completed these requirements, which is like these training courses. So I agree, Whitney, that like having access to the resources to help us to initiate and continue our education, training, all of that stuff is important. And like being able to communicate that to people, like this is the training that I've taken that has helped me to be able to provide the kind of care that I provide. So you can check my receipts. Also feels important. Do we need a certification to qualify someone as an expert? I don't think that is ever helpful. But a certification to say like, yes, I've done these elements of education. I can see how that could be valuable, but I think like there has to be a public campaign about what does a certification actually mean? Because when people see a certification, they think this person is an expert. and that they're going to get no strings attached, perfect care, that like if we can communicate in some way that a certification just means that these boxes have been checked and it doesn't make somebody more qualified, it just makes them educated, and the application or the integration of all of that education is going to vary a lot from one person to the next person. And the certification can't speak to that of like, how well do you integrate and how well do you apply? And like,
I can hear
I don't think
Jessica
it can do those
asking,
things.
do we need to be checking the boxes?
Before I get there, because yes, absolutely. I will say, when you use the term best practices, and I'm sure Steve used something similar, the best practices that we have now say that Black women have, more binge eating and bulimia. The best practices we have are less than 0.01% of the entire research is about Black women and anorexia. The best practices are just like what has been out there, and we're perpetuating that by calling them best practices is something that I have a concern with. Like, we can talk about the research for sure and call it the research, and it's not going to be best practices.
Yeah. I think in my mind, I'm in like such prescriber mode. I'm thinking best practices of like antipsychotics versus mood stabilizers and somebody that's pregnant. Like, so when I think of best practice, I'm thinking like,
yes, 1000%. Like, I do.
But I think that's another piece that Steve has talked about, that he wants the certification to ensure that people are providing evidence-based care.
Yeah.
And evidence-based care for eating disorders is problematic because of all the things that you've just mentioned, Jessica, that it's incomplete, it's biased. And if we rely solely, it doesn't have to be either or, but if we rely solely on evidence-based practice, we're going to be doing a lot of people a disservice. And being able to like integrate evidence-based practice and lived experience and this individual patient in front of me, all of that stuff is really important. And we have a long way to go until we probably don't have to worry about evidence-based practice actually being complete.
Oh my God, y'all just made me have a light bulb moment, because as y'all were both talking, I'm thinking about like evidence-based practice and the, perinatal maternal health world, right? Like, everybody's doing evidence-based, but yet Black women are still dying 4 to 5 times more.
Evidence-based sucks if this is as good as it's getting.
That's so true. That's such a good point though. Like, what really constitute as evidence-based or best practices when you have people that are still dying at alarming rates? Like,
and maybe that's the analogy that we need to communicate, because I think people understand that like the maternal mortality death rates are a problem, and therefore what we're doing is a problem.
Yeah.
But like, we can't apply that same logic to eating disorders for lots of reasons, because I don't think we have good data on like who has an eating disorder, who's getting access to care, who's being referred, who's being like all of those things. Yeah. But like, we can start to recognize these things as a problem in certain areas, but I think we struggle to translate or apply that to other areas.
Yeah.
And even when we see it as a problem, like things are not getting better. I think the maternal mortality
across the board,
it's getting worse. It's not getting better, even though we know.
Yeah.
So
has the credential actually reduced the mortality?
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. So like, I went to a conference, the public health law conference, and then I came home and I told my supervisor, like, cool, now I need to go to law school because I think this like.
Why are we the same person, Meghan? Why are we the same person?
My husband was like, you can't go to conferences anymore because you can't go get another degree. And it's like the follow through of like assessing the impact of our policies. We implement something just like a program or a policy, and then we need to assess the outcome of it. And is it actually doing what we think it's doing, or is it doing what we intended it to do? And we don't have a lot of that other side. We like make policy based on like our best guess of what we think might be good, based on what might be evidence-based, but we don't always know the outcome of whether or not that policy is actually leading to our intended change. And we can figure that out, and we have figured that out in certain circumstances. But yeah.
Clearly with NITA, there was the entire reputation of the field, I think, was being threatened by not centering thin white young girls anymore. I think that was like an overarching situation there. I think Steve's continued reliance on evidence-based practices, really enforces the existing research, which again is mostly thin white girls have anorexia, maintaining the certification rather than just talking about how we need to be looking at lived experience, right? As he was talking about, make sure that we're still centering thin white girls with anorexia. And I think that for me is a theme, and everything else is kind of like a smoke screen for, tax or like disclosures and all of those things. What do y'all think?
I think that was so good. I'm like, I have so many thoughts. The thing, and I didn't come up with this quote, but it's when equality feels like oppression to the privilege. That's when you said that is what made me think of the ED field.
Mm-hmm.
We were demanding and saying not everybody, people have eating disorders that do not fit into this thin, white, able-bodied, cisgender ideal, right? And that really pissed some people off.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting that is what pisses people off. And that is what kind of led to that whole Nita lawsuit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't see a whole lot of marginalization when Nita was transitioning to that social justice sphere. I don't think that when we think about people who with marginalized identities, and I really hate that word. I'm really trying to be more underrepresented, So when we think about people that have underrepresented identities, I don't feel like when all that stuff was happening and I was not there. So for those that are listening, please don't inbox. I was not there. Do I think that there are people that had underrepresented identities? Yes. Do I think it was the best representation? No.
Of all of the people
who hold historically, yeah.
Got it.
If we're like, we see this problem, and so let's start with the problem that is like most in front of my face, like thin white women, and like make it so it's not a problem for them anymore, then that's as far as like the only people who are going to be helped are the people who are the thin white women people and like up the chain or the hierarchy or whatever. And so when the people pushing the change are higher up that hierarchy, even with best of intentions, they're still going to leave everybody else behind.
Damn, Megan, you're good.
That's like what COVID-19 eating support was, right? Like that's what we were trying to do, right? And didn't. And we did something, and it meant something for a lot of people, but it also didn't for a lot of people, right? So like with best of intentions, we left a lot of people out. And I think maybe that's something that could be similarly said for Nita, that with best of intentions, a lot of people were still being left out. And then when we take up that mantle, are we preventing others from being able to do that work more completely? I don't know.
Did the social justice shift happen for Nita after its claims to do so?
I think there were individual people that had good intention to change.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there's individuals. Do I think Nita is the social justice champion? No.
Champion. It's a big ask. What I was hearing about Nita from what Meghan was saying, Meghan, you decided to go back to school and actually make these changes. I'm like, Nita's supposed to be doing what Meghan is doing.
That's it. Yep.
Meghan is doing, all this work to make policy change in this field. What is Nita doing? Putting on walks. I mean, granted, I've been told they go to Congress and advocate for things, but like, how is it that Meghan is the one that is taking this on right now?
I think Nita's doing damage control, right? They're putting a lot of money into reputation and not a lot of money into, I don't know how much money they're putting into research and like changing all of the problems we've identified. But like another piece I think about is like, what does social justice mean to people? Because it means something specific to Steve Dunn. So like, what does that even mean to people anymore? That can even be considered a clown show or like loons. I just don't know what our definitions are anymore for like making sure people have equitable access to like what they need to live or thrive or like survive, like any of those, like all of those, any of those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just don't even know what we're talking about anymore when we have such a like lack of vetting going on for social justice and eating disorders.
Circles, no Venn diagram.
Yeah.
Overall, what do you all take away? And Whitney, did you get your questions answered?
I don't think I got my questions answered for clarity in my mind because again, like I said, I'm still just not quite 100% sure what the intended outcome is of this lawsuit. Like,
fair.
I think that is TBD. I was obviously I'm happy to know whoever the kind soul is that wanted to include the BIPOC conference in that. Thank you. Please reach out so I can properly thank you. Like, I think that's amazing. I thought that was really special to hear. That was the first time I heard that. Yeah, I wouldn't say my questions got answered per se, but I hope that what the conversation did was illuminate people to some deeper issues that really do need to get addressed in the eating disorder field.
Yeah, I think it reinforces that like we have to be having these conversations. And as Whitney said, like with folks that we don't agree with or disagree with, even on a fundamental level, because we're all pushing in some way for something. And if we are only just pushing back again, like that effort is going to cancel out and we're not going to make any progress. So it feels like figuring out how we can have a conversation so we can figure out where we do agree so that we can like move things forward feels important. Otherwise we're shouting into the void and we're like spinning in circles and we might not find that there is anything that we agree on and we aren't going to be able to push forward in the same direction in anything. But I don't know that we'll figure that out if we're not having the conversations.
That's legit.
Just because wheels are turning.
Yeah. I'm thinking about who are the ones talking the loudest, and that is going to be the elites. That's going to be the Margot Mains who at the iaedp conference are telling Black women that their hair is not real in the context of whatever her newest book is. That's going to be the people who are focused on iaedp and concerned about the money bit and not everything else that has been going on. So yeah, I think the conversation has been started. I think Whitney and Angela have started the conversation. I think that people just need to figure out that that is really the future of the eating disorder field because clearly nothing else has been working.
And get out the binary. Like, I'm so excited. I'm not going to give it away, but I'm so excited about your upcoming people too that are going to be on your podcast because like I will never forget the last year's conference, the first presentation. Did not go as well as expected, right? It was a difference of opinion, but through that difference of opinion, I had an appreciation for what that person was trying to cultivate with their respective people and how they were trying to advocate. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can understand the lane in which they were trying to go to. And it's like, we don't always have to agree to be in alignment. And I say that because when talking with people like Steve, we don't agree. I won't go as far as to say on air we're in alignment with a lot of things, right? But I think it's so important to have the conversations with people that are outside of your sphere and disagree on certain things so that we can come to this commonality of if we truly care about the eating disorder field, if we're truly into it, to not have this savioristic mentality of saving people, but to provide the best care. Then like these conversations need to be had. And that's why I love your podcast, because you do make it awkward, but also it gives people a chance to say like, okay, I never thought about it like that. Or I didn't realize, talking about this, here's an alternative option here, and unlike any other mental health niche or field, nobody else is closing at the rate that eating disorder treatment centers are. You know what I'm saying? You don't hear about this in substance use where insurance is just denying providers credentialing. You don't hear about that. It's like very strange that it's really targeting towards eating disorders. We've got this medical and mental component. So I do think it's important, like podcasts like yours and obviously our BIPOC conference, that we are showing that there are people out here with diverse and lived experiences that may have different ways of doing things, but let's listen to their perspective and see what they can say. I don't know if I articulated that very well, but.
Well, yeah. I think like, to be clear, the conversations that Jessica, Whitney, you all are having are the conversations that we need to be hearing, right? Like my conversation with with Stephen Dunn probably isn't going to be what is necessary. So like, this is what I mean when I say like these conversations. Otherwise, again, it's like the echo chamber, because we're not getting, we're just staying in the evidence base, we're not actually getting what we're missing. It's too few and far between. There's not enough listens on your podcast for the width of the gap.
Thank you both so much for coming on for this debrief. Thank you, Meghan, for actually doing the job that apparently organizations are supposed to be doing. Thank you, Whitney. Yes, for starting both this conversation and the BIPOC Eating Disorder Conference. I hope to bring you both back to talk about more things in the future.
Thank you both. It's so lovely to see your faces.
I know. I'm so glad I got to see y'all.
Thanks again to Whitney and Meghan for joining the show. I'm glad we had these conversations and that y'all get to see the undercurrents of this field. I hope people see how brave the people who speak up in the eating disorder establishment are, and the risks people are taking to care for patients and to be cared for. It's what makes the work of Whitney and Angela with the BIPOC conference, along with many others, so important. If folks are interested in consulting with me to examine your hidden biases in your clinical work and identify steps you can take, as Meghan and I did, you can find more at jessicawilsonmsrd.com and in the show notes. Next week, I'll bring you a conversation I had with the Broadway Body Positivity Project and the Broadway Dietitian. You'll get to hear them do some improv singing and their vocal warm-ups. It is sure to delight. This has been an episode of Making It Awkward. I've been your host, Jessica Wilson. This is a production of The Body Politic, supported by the legacy donation of Sacramento Outboard Services and our newest Patreon members. It's edited and mixed by the fabulous Jen Jacobs.